Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Liz Seccuro.
Thank you, that was lovely. Thank you so much. I've been having too much fun. I feel like I'm a guest at an event, and all of a sudden, I looked at Elaine, I was like, oh gosh, that's me, I gotta go up and talk now. So I really want to thank you for the warm welcome. I'm gonna talk a little bit about my husband, Mike, only because he never really has come to see me speak, like a few times, but usually on a college campus. And of course, he's an investment banker, and he knows like 8 million people in the room already. And I'm like, excuse me. He's like, oh my God, I'm having the best time. And I'm like, I'm happy for you, honey. So thank you for welcoming Mike Seccuro here today. Thank you to Pat and to Elaine and to Glory and to everybody and Steve from Praxair. Thank you so much for the work that you do with this wonderful organization. I hope I don't run over, and I won't be offended if you get up and have a drink. I could use one, but I'm waiting until afterwards. So I loved Joe Biden's intro. It's something, we cut it, and you see there's an interview with me as I'm talking about the whole campaign. And tonight I'm going to talk to you as a survivor of both sexual assault and domestic violence. And I know you're probably like, oh God, that girl got the 1-2 punch. But you'll find, if you work at all with the Women's Center, that a lot of people who are the victim of one tend to become the victim or survivor of another. So there will be no feeling bad for me. Obviously, I'm standing here, I'm whole, and that is the greatest gift. So we're going to take you on a bit of a journey and have a bit of a call to action. I'm just very happy to be here. It's a gorgeous night, a little chilly, and a lovely celebration. You should be so proud of the hard work that you've done and continue to do, and how tonight's proceeds will go directly to survivors of gender-based violence. When I got the call to speak here, like literally I was in my car and I got the call from my agent, I was overjoyed, I was like squealing. And I do this like all the time, but I got on a conference call with Gloria and Elaine and I was like, I've got to speak there. They sound like so much fun. I speak all over the country at secondary schools where I believe this education should start. But so many parent organizations are like, no, 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 we can't teach our kids about sexual assault, and that's where it needs to start. I speak at colleges and universities. I speak to college and professional sports teams, law enforcement agencies, law firms, and civic groups. But never is the impact so great as when I meet those of you who are on the front lines, doing this type of work, assisting the victims, manning the hotlines, running Elizabeth House, providing on-site emergency response at the courtroom, in the hospitals, and with police, and partnering with WestCon to create such a comprehensive program that checks all of the boxes. So thank you for having me. And you do this for people of all ages, relying on donors for more than half of the funds to keep it going. You are a model for other communities, so please give yourselves a round of applause. Also, it's really good to be back home in Fairfield County. Yes, fun fact, I used to live in Greenwich, and it's such a beautiful place where I lived for many years, where my youngest child, Leo, who's now 7, was born. And when my case became national news, neighbors and friends like you in this room rushed to my side in a show of support when the media was camped out at my house because, oh, look at the rape victim. Like, ugh, God. Thank you, Geraldo Rivera, for being in the bushes on Rockview Place. Thank you. Tonight I want to really focus on how my life would have been vastly improved if I had had such a place and people and network in my life as I have suffered both sexual assault and domestic violence. And the systems in place failed me. I want to especially recognize the men in this room, the husbands, the fathers, the grandfathers, the brothers, and friends who may not feel as comfortable talking about these topics, as it's horrifying to think of a loved one, male or female, being affected by such violence. I applaud you for coming tonight. I just sunk into a really weird hole. My own husband, Mike, is here this evening, which marks one of only a handful of times you have seen me speak. Even knowing what happened to me is so hard to process. But I'm glad he agreed to come this evening, as he is a terrific example of a secondary survivor. So a special thank you to our gentlemen here for making this topic a part of your wheelhouse. Before I briefly tell my story of surviving both gang rape and domestic violence, I want you to know that as I was preparing for this night, and I literally finished writing it today at 1 p.m. Okay, so this is not just some speech I trot out. I thought a lot about how popular culture has been extraordinarily focused on the issues of sexual assault and domestic violence lately. And while this is actually still a grassroots movement, I know that seems shocking, I am heartened that the masses are being exposed to issues that are not necessarily popular, but when presented as entertainment, may help them to think about these things. For example, sexual assault was so much a part of the many awards performances and films at this year's Oscars. The subplot of The Revenant, I'm not spoiling anything if you haven't seen it, but see it, and The Chief's Daughter, right until the very end. Spotlight, obviously, taking on the Boston Archdiocese scandal of widespread abuse of young boys by priests, and the cover-up with hard-hitting and responsible journalism, unlike that Rolling Stone piece I was involved with, and let's just move beyond that. Mad Max Glory Road and Furiosa's rescue of Immortan Joe's breeders. And who could forget Brie Larson's brilliant and winning performance as Ma in Room, inspired by the J.C. Lee Dugard case and brilliantly written by Emma Donohoe. And finally, Lady Gaga brought down the house with her searing performance of Until It Happens to You, the survivor anthem at the center of Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick's powerful documentary about campus sexual assault, The Hunting Ground. My husband had, I can't even breathe thinking about it right now. My husband had to hold my hand as I sobbed in awe of that performance. And I saw many of my friends out there on that stage that night, joining Gaga and bearing witness to their bravery written right on their arms. I knew we were reaching a watershed moment if Hollywood was taking chances on these scripts and on these performances. And for the past 10 weeks, I don't know what you all have been doing, but record numbers of us have been glued to our screens watching Ryan Murphy's adaptation of the O.J. Simpson double murder trial in American Crime Story. And while there's obviously a slant of campy drama and lots of Kardashians, the message was important, and it introduced many younger viewers, especially millennials, to the trial of the century and the idea that domestic violence can indeed affect us all, even the beautiful wives of beloved sports legends. We cannot forget the precious lives of Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, and how this renewed interest in the trial may help organizations like this one to thrive and to reach even more folks who need our help. There's a conversation between Nicole Brown and the police, as Simpson is yet again attacking her when she says with equal parts fear and resignation, "You've come up here 8 times and you never do anything about it." And during closing arguments, prosecutor Chris Darden looks at the Simpson jury, points at OJ, and says, "He was a hell of a good football player, but he's still a murderer." The victims are often silenced or disbelieved, and the perpetrators are often protected. And so, a thing that I always say before I talk about my story is that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. A very wise young man named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that, and it's the first page of my book. As we look at the 48th anniversary of his assassination, I thought it was important that I said it out loud again so that you all knew how much it meant to me. I try to remind myself of this quote each and every time I speak, because there is no silence and no shame in speaking about the things that matter. In August of 1984, I arrived at the University of Virginia. I was eager to jump into college life. I was a shy, ambitious child. I grew up in Westchester County, not far from here, and I excelled at my all-girls Catholic school. I wanted to go to UVA for one reason, because it had the most highly ranked English department, which was my major of choice. I had graduated as valedictorian. As I packed my belongings for the trip, I was prepared to make my mark at this wonderful school. But those hopes were to be dashed about 5 weeks into my college career, and I was 17 years old. A dorm friend of mine named Jim, actually his name is Tim, I don't know why I'm calling it, he's still a friend of mine, his name is Tim. He desperately wanted to join a fraternity, and he begged me to accompany him as his date to a rush party at the Phi Kappa Psi house. It was October 5th, and I was already in sweats, I was already studying, I was already late. He's like, please, 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 you do what you do for a friend. And back then, rush was in the fall, and many schools now it's changed to January. Changed into my clothes, and yes, I was wearing a mini skirt because the defense asked me that. And we were out the door, accompanied by about 5 other dorm friends. Some were rushing and some were dates. We arrived to a party in full swing. There was a band, kegs of beer, dancing, foosball, not unlike any college experience for any of us in this room or anyone coming after us. There was nothing out of the ordinary but for the fact that Tim was gay. Okay. In 1984, gay men were not openly accepted in Southern Greek culture, and I'm certain they're probably still not. He needed to pass, so I stuck to his side as we toured the massive Georgian property, and we listened to the brothers talk about academia and traditions and the honor that was bestowed upon the lucky few who would be chosen as Phi Kappa Psi brothers. I was bored. I grabbed a red Solo cup, filled it with beer from the keg, stayed with my group, and chatted with the brothers about Tim. He and I got separated after we climbed the grand central staircase to the second floor. We were invited to smoke pot with a few of the brothers, and I declined and told Tim I'd be waiting in this large living area that was on the second floor. The party was full, and I found a sofa near the makeshift bar in the corner. Waiting there, ironically, I thought I was safer than I was walking home alone, given the late night. Two men who identified themselves as brothers were tending the bar. Would I like a drink? Not wanting to seem like an outsider, or worse, a first-year girl, I accepted a green drink in a clear tumbler with a straw that the taller of the two men offered me. He called it the house special. I thanked him, sat down on the sofa, and sipped it. People were drunk and dancing and shouting. Sooner or later, I asked a few people when my date would be returning. I was told not to worry, he'd only be a few minutes and to relax. Suddenly, after a few sips of the green drink, I noticed that something was wrong. My arms and legs began to feel numb. I started to panic, and I was breathing very shallowly and rapidly. At that point, a tall brown-haired man with glasses came over to me, sat down, and peppered me with questions. Where was I from? What was my major? Where did I live? I answered his questions perfunctorily, begging off that I was soon to return to my dorm as I was tired. I had no idea what time it was or how long I had been on the second floor. I felt dizzy and disconnected, and he grabbed my arm aggressively. I shouted at him, but he dragged me off the sofa and down a long hallway like a rag doll. He pulled me into a room at the end, sat me on his lap. I tried to set myself free, and he stuck his tongue in my ear and told me to calm down and be quiet. Adrenaline kicked in, and I freed myself from the stranger, ran into the hallway, and began banging on a door. I had earlier set my purse in this room for safekeeping. The door was padlocked from the outside. I began to scream and kick with the pointed toes of my flat shoes, and at that precise moment, the music was cranked up loudly. One of the guys from the bar in the corner of the room, the tall one who had given me the drink, walked calmly over to me, picked me up like a potato sack, and deposited me back into the arms of the scary stranger. He raped me repeatedly after pinning me down with his arms and legs. He beat me, despite my screams and my begging. Eventually, I passed out from the fear and the pain. I awakened briefly a few times throughout the night. I heard sounds, I heard voices, I heard slamming doors, I felt hands on me. I could not move, though. Suddenly, sunlight flooded the room, and I found myself lying on a filthy orange sofa across the room from where my rape occurred, and I was covered in nothing but a filthy sheet. The sheet was covered with large spots of blood, which I thought was really disgusting, and as I tried to get upright, I realized with horror and disgust that the blood was actually my own. After cleaning up what turned out to be a copious amount of blood on my body and my face in the bathroom, I found my clothing and dressed. I walked down the center staircase out into the chilly morning. The house was really silent for a Friday morning after a huge party. There was no one there. There are two sets of steps leading from the front door of the Phi Kappa Psi house. I began to walk right towards my dorm when I realized I needed to go to the hospital. This wasn't something that was spoken about in my household, but I knew there was a word for what had happened to me, and I knew it was called rape, and I knew I needed to get medical attention. So I walked left. I walked to University Hospital. While I was at the hospital, I was told to wait. Typical. But no one gave me any paperwork to fill out or to sign in. There were stares and gestures and quiet conversations at the desk. Finally, after waiting for a few hours, the nurse approached me and told me that they couldn't help me, that I had to travel to Richmond or Washington, D.C. for what I needed, ostensibly a rape kit. On the following Monday, it was arranged by my RA that I would meet with the dean of students, a man named Bob Canaveri. In great detail, I told him what had happened to me, just as I have told you. I was covered in visible bruises as I sat before him. He dismissed me and told me that I had had sex with a young man and didn't want my parents to know I wasn't a good girl. He suggested I needed mental help, that I was a liar, and he offered to help transfer me to any school I wanted in the country, but that Clemson was a really good choice. Dean Canterbury would not, when I asked him, call the Charlottesville police for me, and I did ask him. He said, Phi Kappa Psi falls under university jurisdiction, so I was allowed to report the attack internally. I was thrilled to talk to the university police, not knowing that they are employed by the university, and probably not the best way to go. That's not true of all campuses, though. He passed me off to Dean Sybil Todd, because it was a female problem, who accompanied me to the University Police Department to give statements to then Captain Mike Sheffield on several occasions. Nothing ever came of the investigation. I was the one calling Sheffield's office constantly, and I was routinely told someone would get back to me. No one ever called me back. I managed to graduate in May of 1988 with my bachelor's degree, but just barely. I made as much noise as I could, but no one heard me. What happened to me then colored my perception of my self-worth for many years, and at 22, I ended up marrying a charismatic psychopath, not him. Oh my God, I did not practice that part. Sorry. Oh my gosh. I ended up marrying a charismatic, not Mike psychopath, sociopath, who hid his true self with extreme skill until after the wedding. Sure, he had a hair-trigger temper towards those he felt were not up to his standards. He snapped at waiters, or taxi cab drivers, or others in service professions, roles he felt were beneath him. To me, this translated to someone who was strong and protective, someone who would stand up for me and keep me safe. Yes, he drank too much, but he did everything in life to the extreme, from studying to going to the gym to our relationship. He lived life from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. I found it intoxicating. We met shortly before graduation from the university, he from the law school, and me with an undergraduate degree. He was brilliant, rakishly handsome, hilarious, cultured, and from a well-pedigreed East Coast family, and I eagerly married him shortly after leaving the school that had damaged me. The reality of my nightmare began on our wedding day itself. I stood at the back of the church with my dad, ready to float down the aisle, when that inner voice told me I was making a huge mistake. Of course, I was 22. That inner voice is very telling. As quickly as that thought infiltrated my brain, I pushed it down, I slapped a dazzling smile on my face, and I walked down that aisle to my future. This is going to be fine. I'm going to be happy. Finally, I'm going to be happy. At the reception, my newly minted husband went on a massive cocaine binge and became agitated and aggressive. He had dabbled in the drug before, but I turned my head because I thought, well, all young attorneys partook of that drug in order to endure the long hours. He ran upstairs to a private room at my parents' country club every 20 minutes, either alone or with his friends. His disappearance angered me. I kept running upstairs to ask him to dance, to eat the next course, to greet family, to take a picture. He became more jangly and impatient. He called me a stupid bitch and a dumb whore at our own wedding. And when I came to fetch him in his makeshift drug den, he was so angry with me. And yet when he came downstairs to the ballroom, he turned on that charm with such fluidity that I didn't know if I should be impressed or scared for my life. I was frightened to be alone with him in our honeymoon suite. He finally took a bunch of Valium to sleep, and I sat in my cloud of tulle and lace, despondent and fearful, as I knew this was not normal. I cried myself to sleep that night, still wearing my wedding gown and my fake eyelashes. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. No apologies. After the honeymoon, we settled into domestic life, and I thought his abusive behavior at the wedding was merely an aberration. He was working as an attorney at a prestigious firm. I had a career in luxury hotel sales and marketing. We bought a beautiful, historic row house in a trendy neighborhood. We socialized with a group of wonderful friends. We hosted monthly dinner parties. We took frequent vacations. This was the American dream, wasn't it? This is what I was supposed to be doing. I felt like I was part of a team, that I had a best friend. Never did I hearken back to the night of our wedding. It was a one-time thing, albeit scary as hell, but that was the drugs, I reasoned. It never entered into my mind to tell anyone what had happened that night. As I dutifully wrote thank you notes thanking our friends for the beautiful gifts from our wedding registries, I was further polishing the image of our perfect marriage. And it was me who was doing all of the lying. About 6 months into the marriage, small slights about dinner, my appearance, my friends, became harsh words. Criticisms grew to pushes. The pushes escalated to the occasional hard shove. Then there were slaps and then punches. I told nobody. Who would believe me? He was beloved in our town and in our circle. Everyone was drawn to him. He was intoxicating. He started coming home at 4 a.m. with no excuses because he didn't have to give me one, he said. Sometimes he would bring friends, sometimes strange women. He would shake me awake and either taunt me with the new friends or try to drag me out of bed to join them. When he was calmer or sober, I made noises about his behavior and how it was hurtful and scary. I told him he needed to stop. He must have sensed my desperation because he, in turn, became desperate. I awoke in the middle of the night only to find him straddling me with a gun pointed to my temple. He said, "If you ever try to leave me, I will kill you." He calmly put the gun back in the night table drawer. I never even knew he had a gun, much less that I was sleeping next to it. My weight dropped to an alarming low. I dutifully covered my bruises with makeup. I self-medicated with alcohol. I blamed myself for being less, something I had felt since being raped and tossed around like a piece of trash, something I felt since the dean of students told me I was mentally ill and a liar, something I felt since the night of my wedding when I was called a stupid bitch by the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I didn't want anyone to know I wasn't a good wife. I didn't want my parents to think they had paid for a wedding for nothing. I was 24, exhausted, and very much alone. The end for me came when he threw me down a flight of steps and I found myself in the ER, paralyzed from the waist down. I lied to the doctors and the social workers repeatedly, telling them that my high heel had tripped and I had tripped over the carpet. In reality, he had followed me to my place of work, where I had a drink with an old college friend who was in town for a meeting. He happened to be male. My ex-husband lay in wait for me when I returned home. The paralysis lasted for 3 days, during which he sobbed at my bedside, promised he would never hurt me again. I had heard it all before. He was sorry. There would be jewelry, there would be flowers, there would be dinners, there would be trips. And I was sucked back in. But at the hospital, as I lay in my bed facing the possibility that I'd never walk again, he told me he was spending his time in the chapel praying when he was not at my bedside. The caterwauling and crocodile tears were so dramatic. And for once, I looked at him and I knew he would never change. I no longer believed him. This man, whose approval was like the very sun shining down on me, was a fraud and a danger to me. He was sobbing because he had gotten caught. He was sobbing because I could have told the doctor. And that was it. That was my breaking point. When I eventually left, it was with one suitcase and the help of 3 girlfriends at 2 a.m. while he was out of town on a business trip, and I was free. I had $200 in my pocket. This man was a millionaire. We are an army, those of us who suffer domestic violence. We work to repair our broken homes, our broken bones, our broken spirits. We are Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, Native American. We are wealthy, we are poor, we are middle class. We are dating to or married to sports stars, to lawyers, to accountants, to sanitation workers. And we are hurting and we are lost. We look for an escape hatch or hunker down with our decisions to stay and keep the proverbial peace, hoping it will never happen again. But it will. I went on to meet a wonderful man, the non-sociopathic Mike, and have my first child, a girl named Ava, and we moved to Greenwich in 2004. So you remember the rapist with the glasses? He had a name. I knew because I had rifled through his mail that terrible October morning as it was on top of his dresser. In September 2005, as we drove out to the Hamptons, where we now live, William Nottingham Beebe wrote a letter to my home to apologize for his actions. It became a firestorm of inexplicable proportions. From September through November of 2005, I corresponded with him via email in order to find out what had happened to me that night. How many attackers were there? He wrote he was the only one. What was in my drink? He didn't know. Why did he rape me? He thought it was a romantic encounter. then why are you apologizing? It was part of his steps 8 and 9 in his Alcoholics Anonymous program. I brought the correspondence to the Charlottesville police, just thinking there might be a serial rapist and hey, you might want to see this, in the event that other victims were to come forward. I had no idea I was actually building a case against Bibi. I was shocked to find out from Chief Tim Longo, who many of you may know from the Hannah Graham murder and Morgan Harrington murder. This man has had so many dead girls under his watch, and he is such a wonderful man. I found out that Dean Canterbury had given me the wrong information. Charlottesville police did indeed have jurisdiction over the Phi Kappa Psi house. And another bombshell, there's no statute of limitations on rape in the Commonwealth of Virginia. In short, Bibi was arrested in January 2006 and charged with 2 counts of felony rape. I testified merely 8 feet away from him because it was juvenile court because I was 17 years old. He was indicted by a grand jury, and as the investigation continued, it was revealed to me through my prosecutor that just as I had suspected in those dark hours before I awoke, that I had been the victim of a gang rape. There had been 3. Bibi's defense team had hired a private investigator, and that investigator uncovered the identities of the other 2 alleged rapists and the details of that night. It was shocking to find out that the rape by Bibi was actually the last one of the night. I had no memory of the other 2, and that information was used to discredit me and my recollection of what happened. I wasn't allowed to read a victim impact statement because the case was still open, and those statements could be used to impeach me as a witness in any future trial. So whenever you hear about a victim impact statement and how important it is for victims to get to say their piece, I never got to do that, but I'm doing it now, here with you guys. The other 2 alleged rapists had hired an attorney, and each appeared before a grand jury, each pleading the 5th Amendment to each of more of the 40 questions asking of them. We know what that means. When my husband and I asked to see the report so that I could fully comprehend the events of that night and what truly happened to me, we were told we could purchase the report for $30,000 from the defense. We declined. Dozens of witnesses from that night were contacted by police. Many were interviewed. Many declined to be interviewed. The bonds of that Phi Kappa Psi brotherhood, which were obviously illustrated in the now debunked Rolling Stone story, were too strong to break. There were witnesses who were sons of very powerful men, congressmen, senators, captains of industry. 2 weeks before trial, Bibi pled guilty to a single charge of aggravated sexual battery. His defense attorneys said that he was innocent, that he was only guilty of, quote, a thoughtless college sex encounter during which he acted ungentlemanly, end quote. We've all had thoughtless college sex encounters. That's not what that is, my goodness. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with all but 2.5 years suspended, and he served less than 6 months. Ultimately, what my story is one of great love, hope, and healing. I never took the easy way out. I had to learn that no one could hand me happiness. I had to choose it. I had to take responsibility. Being a victim isn't a free pass. And that's why there's that phrase, playing the victim. You can do that, but you really can't. I had to love myself. I had to respect myself. And through trial and error, I found my space in this world. People are shocked to know that I write and I speak, that I volunteer, that I was able to find love, and to have children and a life of promise. Usually when you're the victim of something like this, people think you're damaged forever and you're broken forever, and that's simply not true. People think that being gang raped and left for dead or beaten by a boyfriend or a husband dooms you to a life of less. It does not. This is the message I want you to bring to anyone in your life who survived such a devastating crime. And if the numbers are true, and they are true, you've seen those numbers, chances are everyone in this room knows somebody that has been affected by this, and not just because of your work with the Women's Center. Their stories are still unwritten. They don't need to constantly self-identify as victims. I am more. I am worthy. I struggle some days, but I would not take back what happened to me, as it has allowed me to stand right here with love in my heart and to learn from people like you. I've grown up a lot in the last 8 years since I went public, from anger and indignation when I first started out as an activist to action and compassion, and it's the greatest gift I ever could have asked for. Recently, during the Paris terrorist attacks, I noticed an image, as many of you might have, circulating on social media of the late Fred Rogers, or Mr. Rogers, as we like to call him, and I felt its power and its poignancy, and how it applied to the work that we are all doing together to combat gender-based violence. It's a photo of Fred Rogers with the caption, and it says on it, "When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, 'Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.' And to this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in the world." That's what Mr. Rogers said. Caring people like you, helpers like you. Thank you for helping the Women's Center help over 26,000 women, men, and children each year. May that number grow with your, yes, 26,000. May that number grow with your generosity, with your empathy for the victim and human experience. Helpers like you make a tremendous difference in this world of pain and struggle. You help turn stories like mine into stories of triumph and joy. So thank you for helping me. I treasure you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.